This is the Decision Point with Anand Nanduri. Anand, we have NFL free agency. The big moves are in the books. Which move are you most excited by?
For fantasy reasons, it's got to be Justin Fields.
It's pretty exciting.
Right? We love consolidation of targets. We love consolidation of rushing attempts. And in New York, you know who's getting targets and you know who's running the ball. The rushing attempts are going to be Breece and Justin, and the target funnel is going to be Garrett Wilson. So moving all of them up the boards, if you've stashed him in Dynasty, that's a great value for somebody who was basically a trade throw-in a year and a half ago, and now you get a starting quarterback for another year, maybe even two, depending on how the draft turns out. But yeah, he to me was the big winner of the offseason moves so far.
We talked about Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson on the Sonic Truth, and then on the Mind of Mansion last night, talked about it with Justin Curry. And more, I'm being convinced that Breece Hall is a value and that Garrett Wilson is a value. I knew I liked Justin Fields. I love the mobility. I love the possibility that he gets unlocked finally. It's some quarterbacks. It is their third stop. Baker Mayfield was his fourth stop. Baker Mayfield's fourth stop, he finally broke out with Tampa. Who's to say that Justin Fields can't be the Baker Mayfield of 2025? Who says no? In fact, who else would you pick as that guy? Yeah. And the big question on the Sonic Truth was Breece Hall. There's some great signs with Breece Hall in terms of his receiving ability and efficiency. But then there's the opportunity, especially the lack of rush attempts that he's been afforded. That's the big red flag. They bring in Braylon Allen. Now you see mock drafters in some cases, like Lance Zierlein. I mean, Ashton Jeanty to the Jets? Right? I mean, they're marking down Ashton Jeanty to the Jets. And you're like reminding everybody that the Jets are not all in on Breece Hall, even though they're not all in on Breece Hall at this price in the third or fourth round in best ball on FastDraft. I love it. I love that. I love getting that type of player at a pick where there are guys that just aren't that talented. Like, for example, Bucky Irving going before Breece Hall, I don't agree with that. I just don't agree with that. I don't agree with that in Dynasty. I don't agree with that in any format. I would much prefer Breece Hall because while Bucky Irving he had one of the more successful rookie seasons you'll see for a running back, he is sharing a backfield with Rachaad White, who's a great receiver, whereas Braylon Allen is more of a great runner, and I would prefer the receiving skills. The receiving touches are more valuable than the carries. So for a lot of reasons, I'm getting more and more excited about Justin Fields and, like you said, this consolidated weaponry where it's just Garrett Wilson out wide, and it's going to be a lot of Breece Hall and even some Braylon Allen, but there's just not a lot else there, and they have a lot of other needs like offensive line. They're rebuilding this team. I think Justin Fields is actually a great rebuild quarterback. So I'm interested in how this is all going to play out. And I have circled Hall and Wilson as great fantasy values.
Yeah, we did this last year with Chase Brown, where it's basically just if you avoid the landmine of high-end draft capital, like you're going to be something because we know that the offense will be good enough. Right. I think, Cincinnati last year obviously exceeded even our expectations, and we thought they'd be pretty good, but I don't think anybody saw them being what they turned into. If the Jets offense is just pretty good, if they're even just okay, you have three pieces, what three pieces you want. Nobody was looking. I mean, Andre Yosavash, obviously last year for Cincinnati was kind of the throw-in, but you knew what pieces of the Bengals offense you wanted. Burrow at ADP was going pretty high, so it was basically Chase, Higgins, and Chase Brown. I think you can have a very similar situation here where your late round flyer is Braylon Allen. Your your running back if you're trying to either best ball or if you're, potentially trying to do hero RB and really trying to wait as long as you can for that RB1. I think Breece is a pretty solid one, especially if they don't add anyone in the draft. But we do this every year where we're expecting someone's role to be taken by someone in the draft, and then it ends up not happening, and anybody that was early enough to see it gets this massive value on running back, which, as we know, is one of the hardest things to find right now.
Yeah, it's true. It's a fact that Bucky Irving on FastDraft is going a couple spots ahead of Breece Hall in the 3rd round. It's a fact. Go there. Go to the App Store, go to Google Play, type in FastDraft Fantasy, get the app, use code Podfather, $25 deposit match, and join the Flex 4, and you can draft. It's easy. It's just 10-team drafts. You draft 6 guys, the top 4 into your lineup. It's all players that you know and love, mostly. There's some James Connors in there, and there's some guys that are just getting touches, but mostly they're fun players, and a lot of the value can be had with rookies because they haven't landed yet, and with the players that are in flux post-free agency, like Davante Adams, like Breece Hall, like Garrett Wilson. So what do you think about Davante Adams to the Rams?
I like it for a lot of reasons. So I think that Davante's probably best suited as a number 2 right now. But what he does still so well is get open. It's a lot of the Robert Woods prototype that the Rams had in their offense in years past. And I think it allows Puka to not have to do so much of the dirty work in the pass game, especially when Cooper was hurt. You saw Puka basically become one of the best blockers in the league and put a lot of damage on his body. He was starting to really feel it towards the end of the season because, again, you're basically being used as a fullback and a primary receiver. Not a lot of guys' bodies are going to hold up doing that. So I think in trying to get him some of the pressure taken off of him as a number 1, there are weeks that I think Davante will return wide receiver 1 numbers for you. He's still got that in his bag. Now, would I draft him in round 1 or 2 like we used to in the past? Hell no. But I think in terms of a meaningful wide receiver acquisition, as far as guys that are really trying to chase that last shot at a Super Bowl, you could do a lot worse than Davante Adams given what he's done in the last couple of years, because I don't think he's totally washed yet. I think he's got a year or 2 to give you. But losing Cooper Kupp hurt my soul. So happy but sad.
Don't think he's totally washed yet?
No.
Are you how dare you even
I still love him.
that word tumble from your lips? Washed. Davante Adams is still elite. Davante Adams was putting up 20-plus fantasy points each and every week at the end of the season, at the end of a lost season. And his target
that's because
share,
Rodgers loved him. Like that's a different.
No, it doesn't matter. Is it Aiden O'Connell? Is it Jimmy Garoppolo? Is it Derek Carr? He's top 5 in the league in target share, and he still has it, man. This guy has explosiveness that he has maintained with his strength and conditioning in a way that Cooper Kupp wasn't able to, because Cooper Kupp came into the league with a lot less burst and had a lot more lower body injuries. I mean, every year it was some kind of foot or ankle injury sapping his explosiveness, where Davante Adams has been a pillar of health and a pillar of strength and conditioning. The big question is, where do they play him? That's what I want to ask you. That's the big debate that I had last night with Justin Curry. We don't know. It's just a great thought experiment. Think about, if you're Sean McVay, are you posting up Davante Adams at X and moving Puka into the Kupp role? Is that why you made this move? Or are you going to keep Puka at X and just copy and paste in Davante Adams, a bigger, better, more explosive version of Cooper Kupp, essentially, to play that volume slot? That would be what I would do. But, I mean, maybe they have ideas for what they want to do with Nacua, because Kupp was always in motion, and you saw Nacua was always just posted up on the outside. and he's a great blocker. That was the beauty of it, right? But so is Davante Adams. So is Cooper Kupp, by the way. Those crackback blocks, really good. I don't know the answer. You could just go with the continuity, keeping Puka at X, or get a little more creative, put Davante Adams at X because he can win there. And then now you have Puka in that Kupp role, which would be the ultimate unlock for Nakua. That's where he could be the wide receiver one in all of fantasy, is if they put him in the Kupp role.
I think they're going to try to assemble basically what the Niners had in 2023, where it was Debo, Ayuk, Kittle, McCaffrey, and you had no idea who was doing what role on any given down. All of them can block. All of them can pass catch. It was just a nightmare to defend while all of those guys were healthy. And so that's why I think, they tried to make the trade up last year for Brock Bowers. That's pretty well documented. I wouldn't be surprised if they're going to try and go after a Tyler Warren or a Colson Loveland and really try to recreate some of the mismatched nightmares that San Fran team had. Just because, again, if you have a bunch of guys that can all do everything well, Adams, totally complete receiver profile. Nakua, totally complete receiver profile. Loveland or Warren, if one of them happened to show up at tight end, right? I think when you look at how they could deploy all of those guys, you have no idea what the fuck's coming. And you've still got, again, everybody hated it because it's just boring Kyron Williams over and over and over again. And when they drafted Blake Corum, we were all excited about that too. Now, who knows? They may add a third running back into that room, and you're looking at suddenly an offense that's been totally retooled, but still has all of the elements of your classic Sean McVay offense, just maybe supercharged in certain spots in a way that it hasn't been yet.
The chat doesn't know, right? The chat doesn't know. We have that tall guy thinks it's going to be Puka in the slot. And then, of course, the fantasy plumber, we can always count on the fantasy plumber to be helping us live. He thinks it's going to be Adams because Adams played in the slot 40% of snaps with the Jets. And Adams' average target depth has been coming down from 10 to 9.5 to 9. It's ticking down every year as he's getting older, just like Larry Fitzgerald's ticked down. It's like this is what happens. But what happened last year? His yak per target bumped up, right? So there's ways that you can demonstrate that you still have juice. It's either with target depth or yak. And if he's making people miss after the catch, then that requires some explosiveness. Just ask Deebo Samuel what happens when you start to lose that juice. And it also affects the rest of your game. It gets in your head where he's just dumping balls on the ground, right? It was so frustrating. God, don't remind me about some of those Deebo games. Oh my God. Anyway, who knows? All we know is, it's not going to be Whittington, right? It's whoever the third and fourth receiver, nobody cares. And everybody wins. This is one of the ultimate tide that lifts all boats free agent move. This does not impact Puka at all. He's going to get the same target share. His target share is locked in. It's like, what does the rest of the target share look like? It helps Kyron Williams because he's going to score more touchdowns. It helps Matthew Stafford, obviously, if you have an upgraded quarterback. So that's why the debate between is Fields or is Davante Adams the more interesting free agent signing or more interesting trade or transaction in the last week, it's a very difficult decision. I posted a video on YouTube recently, or it's going up soon. If you're watching live, it's going up soon. Where I think it's Adams for all those reasons, but I 51-49 on that because I also love the Justin Fields edition too. It's an exciting time. It's why we're doing all these podcasts this week. It's like bang, 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 bang. We got to talk about this, man. What's another move that intrigued you?
Yeah, and noted fan of Geno Smith here, so obviously extremely biased. But I thought that Seattle dumping Geno to Vegas was interesting for a number of reasons. Number one, the Raiders have been looking for anybody to play quarterback. And in the door walks a top 12 guy in the league in terms of processing, in terms of what he's doing at that position. Now, for fantasy football, he hasn't been a top 12 QB in a minute. But what he's actually doing at that position down to advance the offense down the field from a pure football standpoint, he's one of the 12 best we have in the league. And there just aren't a bunch of guys that can deal with muddy pockets the way that he did in Seattle. I think when you look at what Seattle gave up to chase the bird again, like we watched them do this a decade and a half ago. They saw the shiny toy in Matt Flynn work out in Green Bay. They signed him to this massive deal and then draft Russell Wilson, and Russell Wilson starts from the word go. Matt Flynn is just bench riding. Then they get rid of Russell Wilson, icon of the franchise. They bring in Geno and Drew Lock. Geno works out, right? So they give him this massive deal, and then they trade him. Now you're bringing in Sam Darnold. And so these two moves side by side are intriguing because you're looking at replacing a known quantity top 12 quarterback that's done it for you for multiple years now for a guy that had a career season behind one of the most brilliant offensive minds in the sport, arguably, if not the best receiver in the sport, one of the best number twos in the sport, one of the best tight ends in the sport, a career resurgence here for one of the best running backs in the sport, behind one of the better O-lines in the sport. And what you're telling me is I think he can replicate this in Seattle better than the guy that we know is top 12, that we've watched, that we've scouted, because Klint Kubiak came over from New Orleans and had a shot of sperm and 2 shots of whiskey work out in the first 3 weeks last year. Everybody went crazy over him. Now he's in Seattle. You think Sam Darnold is going to be better than Geno Smith? There is no way in hell, dog. He may have better numbers if you go find better receivers in the draft, but he is not a better quarterback than Geno Smith. I promise you that. And so I thought it was interesting from the standpoint of we're downgrading at QB. We're going to pay him a lot of money, by the way. It's not like we're downgrading at QB and getting the Justin Fields contract at $20 million a year, Daniel Jones at $14 million a year. We're paying him $30+ million a year to be the guy. It's a 3-year deal. You know, it's not some bridge quarterback here. And what we're doing is also acknowledging that we're in kind of a rebuild, and one of the best things we have, one of the reasons that you would go somewhere, is they have an established quarterback, which, again, Sam Darnold was a throwaway 12 months ago, a total throwaway. He was a guy that you weren't even excited about, potentially getting excited about. Then McCarthy gets hurt. He has this great season, whatever. We all know that every couple of years the Vikings do this with somebody. Case Keenum, let's sign him to a big deal. No, stop falling for this. It happens every couple of years. Minnesota does something with a quarterback that we all know is mid. And, you know, I tweeted this out earlier last week. Do not let your girlfriend keep you from finding your wife. Stop doing this. Every year, some team falls into this trap. You do not need a mid quarterback. You do not need to pay $35 million a year for average, or sometimes even below average. Stop doing it. I don't understand why anyone would do this, and I certainly don't understand why you would replace someone that has been good for someone that has been awful for most of their career and had one good year for what ultimately amounts to the same money. I will never understand it. I don't get it, and I think Vegas made out like bandits.
Here. I mean, can we get an applause line for that? I mean, please. I mean, honest, this is amazing. Yes. Thank you. It reminds me a couple of years ago. Remember Daniel Jones? Suddenly everyone was talking about Daniel Jones. And I remember someone lamenting that they didn't get Daniel Jones in a best ball draft and how upset they were. And I was like, what are we talking about? Daniel Jones? It's like, what are we talking about? Sam Darnold, I mean, that draft class, by the way, what a resurgence.
Yeah.
I mean, that draft class was dead and buried. And then all of a sudden now we have Baker and Sam Darnold, and it's like, oh, look at me go. This is great. 2018 draft class making this huge comeback. Darnold had one good game, one really good game, okay, against Atlanta. Okay, against Atlanta, he put up huge numbers. Okay, he had 5 touchdowns, 347 yards. Good game, right? He had 2 other games with over 300 yards. That's it, right? He was very solid, very good. He had a game with 180 yards and 4 touchdowns. I mean, this is just a classic luck-boxed season where, oh, who did you beat this week? Oh, the Giants. Oh, who did you beat this week? Oh, the Colts secondary. Oh, we were at the Jaguars and we barely won. Then we went to Tennessee, right? It was just like okay, fine, right? I mean, it's
good for Sam. Glad he got his money. I mean, but this is
I don't believe you. I don't believe you that Sam like it's just some quarterbacks, especially if they're top 10 picks. A lot of NFL analysts are just waiting for them to be good at some point. They don't want to let go. They're rooting for them to be good. And
it's the girl. Yeah. It's NFL GMs at some point are the girl at the end of the bar that keeps saying, I can fix him. No, you can't. He sucks. He is exactly what he was before. He is the 20th best quarterback in the league that you are paying like he's the 12th best quarterback in the league. That does not move the needle for you at all. At all.
Hey, we resurrected one Jets quarterback. We'll resurrect another. Like, this is what we're doing in Seattle. We're resurrecting Jets quarterbacks. Well, in this particular case, you're doing it at the expense of continuity. So now you've got and uncertainty. So if they're actually trying to win, this is not the way to go. Yeah. So congratulations to Sam Darnold, by the way.
Yeah. Like, good for you, bro.
You made it, dude. Again, you did it. You kept pulling the lever. You kept going out there, and you finally put together a season that your agent can put in front of teams and be like, pays this man his money. You didn't even get to 19 fantasy points a game. He had a nice 18.8 fantasy points per game coming off a season where he had 2 fantasy points a game.
Right.
And then the last time in 2022, when he was actually starting, he put up 15 fantasy points a game. You're going to get a lot closer to the Sam Darnold 2022 numbers in Seattle than you will the Sam Darnold 2024 numbers, because he does not have Justin Jefferson. TJ Hawkinson and Jordan Addison, they're nice. The offensive coordinator's nice. Everything's nice. The conditions are nice. Everything's nice. It's Jefferson. He doesn't have he has Jackson Smith and Jigba, but he's not. Good. That's not Jefferson.
No one is.
But we do like Jackson Smith and Jigba. It'll be interesting where his ADP settles in fantasy football over the next couple weeks.
Yeah, I think that, one of the things that, when we get into discussions like this on here, I think one of the things that kind of gets lost in it sometimes is you can be a pretty okay to average quarterback and float really, really good wide receiver seasons. Like, I don't think that Sam Darnold being there is a big problem for JSN. As much as it would be for a number 2 that eventually shows up there.
No, what matters for JSN is that there's no DK Metcalf and no Tyler Lockett.
Yeah.
And he has a pocket passer. Now, fairness to Darnold, 212 rushing yards. That's pretty good rushing production. That's part of the reason why he put up, when you look at his game log, it looks like the game log of a 17.5 fantasy points per game quarterback. But then you factor in the rushing, and it's like, oh, no, this is how he was actually a top 10 quarterback in fantasy last year. This makes sense. But he won't with these weapons in Seattle and 2 running backs that they're going to want to feed. So he's not someone that I would be drafting with any kind of frequency. Now is the perfect time. It doesn't get any better unless they go out and draft a receiver. You could either trade him now in Dynasty just on the enthusiasm around the contract, or better, wait, let them draft Matthew Golden And then as soon as they get Golden in the building, then you trade Sam Darnold in Dynasty.
Yeah. I think, as far as looking at Sam as an asset, he's always been kind of a mystery box. We do this with quarterbacks that are talented enough to go in the top 10. It's a big part of the reason why they get retread several times. But I think he has all the talent. It's just, you kind of are what you are at this point. And, if you're looking for a dynasty asset to hold value, I mean, I don't really foresee Darnold holding a ton of value for you. He's either just a guy that you have to spot start or a guy that you're trading away. Right. It's not like you're excited to start Sam Darnold as QB2, given what we've got going on in Seattle right now. But yeah, for me, he's a firm move if you can, and if you got to hold him, sure, fine. But at this point, he's no more than a bottom end QB2, maybe high end QB3 for me.
You don't want him opening camp for you. You want him off your team in Dynasty by the time they open camp. So they have pick 18. And it's a coin flip whether or not Golden's going to be there. Do you think Golden's going to be there at pick 18?
I have a feeling someone's going to move up for him.
Oh, Speed. You think someone's going to move up for him?
Speed. Every year this happens. Every time someone runs in the 4.2s at the combine, someone gets enamored with the idea of the fact that they may have found the next Tyreek Hill. They may have found the next, dynamic Deshaun Jackson type weapon. And every year that we get one of these guys that blows up the combine and runs a fast 40, someone trades up and takes them probably 10 to 12 spots higher than they should be taken. It's usually a pretty bad team. So I don't know who it's going to be, but I think someone's probably going to trade up for him. Because again, this receiver group this year, the draft gives you what the draft gives you. You can't, I wish we could import like Madden and just create our own draft classes to help everybody out, but the draft just gives you what it gives you every year. College football will give you whatever comes out. And this year you really only have one true X wide receiver, and that's Tet McMillan. Outside of that, it's a bunch of guys that you would probably ideally like to be number 2s instead of number 1s. And, as soon as Tet's gone, and Travis Hunter's gone, because, again, he's going to be drafted in the top 5. As soon as those two guys are gone, it's going to be Matthew Golden and a bunch of, do you want Emeka Egbuka to be your 1? Do you want, somebody else? Because they're not the same type of receiver at all. And, I think someone's going to get enamored with that 40 time and trade up for him.
Well, there's a few options if you're looking for an X receiver. Right, Jaden Higgins.
Mm-hmm. Right? I'm talking about round guys, but yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, Jaden Higgins, he has a 94th percentile speed score. He's 6'4", 214. So if you are looking for an X receiver, which now Seattle is, you could argue that this is a much better move than going with Matthew Golden. I think Matthew Golden's a great fit because he stretches the field and creates more room underneath for Jackson Smith and Jigba. But Jaden is also a great choice, right?
Yeah.
You like Higgins a lot. He had, averaged over 1,000 yards per season in the last 2 years. Target share going up, even with Jalen Noel there. Touchdowns going up. He's still pretty young. He's only 22 years old. 76th percentile college dominator while sharing a field with another second-round pick talent. I like Jaden Higgins a lot. I think that would be my move if I was an NFL GM, especially in a place like Seattle. That's who I would be targeting in the second round. I prefer to use second-round picks on receivers than first-round picks. The team that I think would be the best fit, other than the Cowboys, I mean, I think the Cowboys could shock us. Everyone's like, oh, they're going to take Genty. They're going to take Genty. And it's like, no. They're going with the Texas receiver with speed. Jerry wants that guy. They know that's going to help CeeDee Lamb. That's going to help the offense. I think that Golden to Dallas, I think, is one of the no-brainers on the board. No, I just don't believe that they have totally changed their philosophy that running back doesn't matter post Saquon Barkley. They could. It could. Like, Saquon Barkley has definitely affected at least 5 teams that were likely fading running back in the past. He's definitely infected the brains and nullified the analytics departments in at least 5 franchises, I would say, after what happened last year with Saquon Barkley. I don't think that that's Dallas. I think Dallas with Golden, the local kid, it makes, I mean, it's just the most logical thing. It would be nice also, though, for him to go to Arizona. But there's no way Arizona uses a first-round pick on a receiver in back-to-back seasons. You just rarely ever see that. When was the last time you saw that?
I'm reminded of the Lions run where they took, like, was it 3 or 4 in the top 5?
Okay, yeah, the Lions. Okay, so we're talking about Calvin Johnson and Roy Williams and
Mike Williams.
Mike Williams.
Yeah, that was a fun time. We're better now, Detroit.
No, there was one more. They took the guy from Michigan State.
Charles Rodgers?
Charles Rodgers. Was it like 3 out of 4 years?
Yeah, it was nuts. Whatever it was.
Yeah, so maybe you could go all the way back to that time. I don't know. Probably since then there's been another team that has drafted a wide receiver in the first round back-to-back seasons. Let us know in the chat if anyone can think of one. I would be open. I'd love to know. I mean, this is not something I have at the top of the dome.
It's definitely not the Packers.
When was their last first-round wide receiver?
Was it in my lifetime? Like, that's not a joke.
Sterling Sharp?
Might have been.
Was he a first-round pick? I don't even know if he was a first-round pick.
So,
let's see.
Was
Sterling Sharp, let's look it up. Sterling Sharp draft pick. Yes. Sterling Sharp was drafted by the Green Bay Packers as the 7th overall pick in the 1988 draft.
That may be the last time that they drafted a first-round wide receiver.
Maybe. Well, again, we don't have like a real-time statistician on staff, so the chat is going to have to do. The chat's going to have to help us with this. Also, chat, request. If you're watching this on Twitter X, we know a lot of people on Twitter X are watching this, retweet it. Like or retweet the show. Retweet it ideally. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. A lot of people that watch on YouTube don't actually subscribe. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel. You won't be sorry. And like this. And then after the show, comment on it. Find whatever take you agreed with the most or disagreed with the most and highlight it. Or better yet, if you have a take about a free agent that we have not covered, for example, you might object to the fact that the Cowboys decided to overpay a special teamer in Javonte Turpin. Maybe that's the thing. Who knows what thing is bothering you, right? You're like, I can't believe they gave Turpin $18 million to a special teamer when Doolin only got less than $10 million, right? Now, again, Turpin's very good, but so is Ashton Doolin. Ashton Doolin re-signed. You love to see it. And I have a number of other questions for Anand, and we'll get into it after this. Hey, what if I told you there was a Dynasty app where you could get player lifetime values, evaluate trades, including draft picks out to 2028, compare the advanced metrics of 2 players, look up the sentiment, buy, sell, hold on players? Well, there is a mobile app that has all of that and more called the Dynasty Dominator, and it's $5 in the App Store on Google Play. This is my gift to you, the most affordable Dynasty League domination app available today. And if you already have it, the 2025 class is ready to download. Let's go! So, who else? Who else signed or was traded that excited you?
Excitement is the wrong word here.
Okay.
But to me, I thought Christian Kirk ending up in Houston is interesting. And it's interesting because we've seen what the Houston offense can look like with Stroud, Tank Dell, Nico, and Diggs. Right? And the offense can clearly support 2 wide receivers. We know Nico, and we know what he's going to be. And we wish Tank Dell the speediest of recoveries. That injury still haunts me. It's ugly. Do not watch it if you haven't watched it.
The chat has responded, and they have responded with vigor. Javon Walker, first-round pick to the Packers.
Oh, nice.
Was he from Florida?
Florida State, I think.
Okay.
Right?
I think he's a Florida guy. One of those two schools.
One of them. But I thought it was interesting that that's the route they went, where you can kind of see the vision for where Christian Kirk would fit into that offense. Obviously, they love Dalton Schultz, and Mixon coming there was a big deal. But to me, it's just such a natural piece fit where he was expected to be a one in Jacksonville, and he was just never going to be that guy. And here he can be the two to Nico Collins, who clearly has established himself as a very good one. I think he's a super value given what they've got. Now, if they add another wide receiver in the draft, or if we're looking at something beyond that, right, where we can't forecast the future, but I can't imagine a scenario where they expend first, second round draft capital on a receiver, given the other holes they've got on the O-line. I think that's kind of one of the big winners of free agency was Christian Kirk, because you get to leave Jacksonville and go to Houston, where you have a quarterback, you've got a wide receiver one. You don't have to be the guy, and you're still going to get your targets because they love throwing the ball down there. But I think that was kind of one of the big winners of free agency.
Sort of the anti Davante Adams, in that with Davante Adams, we don't know where he's going to play. Is he going to play outside? Is he going to play inside? We'll see what happens. We know where Christian Kirk's going to play. Christian Kirk was dominating out of the slot at Texas A&M. And any move to try to shift him to the perimeter has always failed. And Nico Collins is the last receiver you need to shift inside. So this is perfect. Like you said, this is the perfect talent configuration for C.J. Stroud. I love this for Stroud. I like Stroud this year. I think Stroud is the guy that is, however much money I have, I would bet that C.J. Stroud outproduces Sam Darnold for fantasy football. That would be the easiest bet of my lifetime. Fantasy points per game. Whatever. I'll go to the bank. I'll go to Western Union. I'll make it happen. Like if I could just in fiction come up with like someone on the other side of a bet that I would do, it would be Stroud outscoring Sam Darnold. Like whoever that is, the person who is the most soaked in recency bias in sports, find that person and be like, so what do you think of this? This is pretty even, right? Like Darnold definitely outproduced him last year. One guy's
it'll happen again, right?
This is a coin flip, right? Stroud or Darnold, there's similar draft capital. There's all kinds of things you could say. Technically, Darnold's got a better contract right now. It's just all kinds of things. You'd be like, yeah, like no. One guy is more mobile, a better downfield thrower, better weapons, better offense, better offensive line, better everything. It just. The defense was so good that it held him back last year, but defenses year to year are very volatile. So you just, that's the uncertainty you lean into, is how healthy is the defense going to be? Probably not as healthy as they were last year in Houston, and that means they're going to have to lean on C.J. Stroud. That's what I'm expecting. One signing that I liked for fantasy, and I think it's under-discussed, is that there was no guarantee that Aaron Jones was going to get re-signed. Aaron Jones was a free agent. So often, a running back will sign a one-year deal, and he will fulfill his obligation, and then he's moving on. And you see this happening all the time, where every year we look up, and Kareem Hunt is on a different team. Right? It's just that's the life of one of these journeyman running backs. Oh, now Fournette's on the Bills. Okay, great. Not so with Aaron Jones. So Aaron Jones also has some similarities with Davante Adams in that he's aging very well as a former Packer.
I mean,
what did you make of the Vikings saying, you're turning 30 and we're going to sign you up for 2 more years.
I think the idea is to make life for J.J. McCarthy as easy as possible. You give him a veteran running back, 3-down guy that's done it, for Aaron Rodgers, one of the 5-10 best QBs ever. Came in, was admirable for you last year, played really, really well. And then you surround him with everything that he would need to be successful. Remember, Christian Darrisaw missed a lot of last year. He'll be back. And you're building this wall. So he's going to get one of those situations that he's, to me, not to comp one running back to another, because that's not what I'm doing here. But he's going to have that 2018, 2019 Jared Goff-like setup for him, where they're not going to ask him to do everything. And one of those things that you need is a workhorse 3-down back. And, instead of rolling the dice and trying to find one either in the draft or, trade for somebody or a free agent, notably, Cincinnati did the same with Pirine. I think their idea was just, hey, we have a guy that we like. We've seen him be productive in this offense. Everybody here has already worked with him. He's not going to be a locker room problem. He's a great leader. Let's just take him for 2 more years. Get the kid get his feet wet, and then, once we kind of figure out what we have in McCarthy, and if we really need to push the chips in again, we'll either draft another one or we'll find someone off the street to come in, kind of like the Eagles did with Barkley, or the Ravens did with Derrick Henry. A lot of these guys are becoming expendable, and I think their thought there was he's probably more valuable to us than he would be to somebody else.
Totally. Bird in hand, man. A bird in hand is worth what?
3 in the bush in this case.
Oh! Let's go. Let's go, Aaron Jones. I love Aaron Jones. Again, another value, like older player. I don't like to bet on older players. I'm not betting on Mike Evans. Most of these older players, the rug's going to get pulled in the year you least expect it. But the first year of a 2-year deal for a running back, it's typically pretty safe. So, and then from what we saw last year from Davante Adams, especially with the yak and the target share and the production down the stretch, I think if you're going to pick a couple older players, Davante Adams and Aaron Jones would be ones. And it makes sense. They're like, listen, we have all this uncertainty around J.J. McCarthy. Let's create a nest around him with absolute maximum continuity. Do you know which team had the most continuity heading into 2024?
I don't off the top of my head.
The Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers opted to keep Chris Godwin, not trade him. They had Rachaad White. They drafted a new young running back, but everything else was exactly the same. And what did they do? They just brought in a new quarterback, and that was it. They just wanted the continuity from one year to the next. Hey, Baker, let's run this back, and nothing else changes. And I love that for J.J. McCarthy. I love the continuity. Continuity is something that is underdiscussed. It's undervalued. But whenever I see a team doing this, I'm like, okay, this tells me that they feel so good about the situation, and that everyone that has J.J. McCarthy in Dynasty, it should just make everyone more confident and comfortable. You should not trade him. We had this debate on the Sonic Truth, J.J. McCarthy versus Justin Fields. And my snap call was, clearly Justin Fields, because that's how I roll. And I still believe that's true in single quarterback leagues, because I'm, always going for it with a guy like Justin Fields, who has top 5 potential. But anytime you need continuity, and in Superflex, that's when you need a little more continuity at quarterback, you got to go J.J. McCarthy here. And he is a great pick, in Superflex. Because a lot of times in Superflex startups in Dynasty, you're going to invest an early pick in a quarterback. And then it's always a question of that second and third quarterback, who's that going to be? Ideally, J.J. McCarthy is your third quarterback in Superflex. If you just completed a startup and you look up and your third quarterback is J.J. McCarthy, you're probably in great shape. Your team is probably looking really good. And by the way, on FastDraft, we have the best Dynasty Startup Mock Tool. Now, there's other places you can go, like Sleeper, and what to do rookie mocks or startup mocks, and they're difficult to set up. No matter where you go, it's very tedious to set these up. We wanted to create an interface, the mock draft button on FastDraft, where you can just so easily set up these mock drafts. You can also mock one of the real money tournaments. So you can do a D-up mock draft. If you're not so sure about the defensive game, but you know you want to sweat the defensive side of the ball on Sunday, but you're like, I don't know, man. How are these players really going to shift? How do I know where the values are shifting and how this is all going to sift out? You can go to the mock draft button, and there you can do a D-up mock, and you can see, okay, oh, I know that guy. Oh, I know that guy. And you'll end up in the 4th and 5th round. You're like, oh, I know these guys. Oh, okay, this is not as hard as I thought. So that's the probably the most underrated aspect of FastDraft is this whole mock draft thing. And it was one of those things where they told me at the time, the luminaries in the industry, oh, you don't want to have a mock draft section because then that'll distract people away from playing for money. And I'm like, well, okay, well, what about the other way? What about people might go to mock draft and then they might decide, oh, I want to play in a real money tournament also. Has anyone ever thought about that? No? Okay. No. Well, we're going to try something new and give people what they want. I know there's demand for this. I know people want to mock draft and mock draft quickly. Let's do it. So that is the backstory for that. What else? Javonte Williams, $3.5 million to the Cowboys. I mean, talk about the opposite end of the spectrum. We talk about where Aaron Jones is in terms of my excitement and my confidence. Javonte Williams, that doesn't even necessarily guarantee that he's going to make the team. How the mighty have fallen. He just is not a player that can withstand lower body injuries and still retain his explosiveness. He's become a total slug over the last couple of years based on these injuries. I think that had he stayed healthy coming out of North Carolina, he would have been a really good all-purpose running back. But guys in that situation, if they sustain a bunch of lower body injuries at the wrong place, wrong time, they're going to be dustified very quickly. And $3.5 million as your second contract, 1 year, it's just sad. Like, he's just going to fade out of the league. He might not even make it through the 2025 season, and then he's going to have to go on and find a new job somewhere else, especially with this particular running back class. This particular running back class should terrify everyone. Just Javonte Williams' agent, everybody listening, please tell him not to just mail in the offseason. He's got to work incredibly hard to make sure he locks in that roster spot with Dallas. Here's the thing that nobody has talked about in all the podcasts that I listen to, and I certainly haven't mentioned it yet. There are going to be undrafted running backs from this class in particular that get cut, that end up going to teams like Dallas, and you think you have that roster spot up until the week before the season, and then you get cut because another team cut a running back that the team you're on was thinking about drafting in the 7th round but couldn't push the button. Yeah. But we're talking about, like, in other draft classes, running backs that would go in the 4th and 5th round are going to go 6th, 7th, and undrafted this year. And final cuts is going to open up just a laundry list of quality, talented running backs that teams can add, and they can swap out running backs on the depth chart the week before the season. That is going to happen. So, I mean, for a guy like Javonte Williams, he is going to have to just work and grind and just keep his head down and not think about worst case scenario all the way up until like week 1 kickoff.
Yeah. The thing for me, nothing Dallas does makes any sense. I don't understand what their entire offseason plan has been. You have arguably the best defensive player in the league. You could have paid him last year. You didn't. Okay, so be it. Now you've got to go up against Myles Garrett's contract. Good luck with that. you've been extending late forever. It's costing you more money. There's no reason for you to do it. It's not like you're the Bengals and you're somewhat cash strapped. There's no reason for you not to do it. But now the priority splash offseason move here is Javonte Williams at $3.5 million. Like, it's so sad to me. One, because I think Javonte Williams is awesome. And it's just, again, another guy that injuries just took the career from. He was coming into the league. He was one of our favorite. Yeah, he was one of our favorite players coming in.
Very good second-round pick. A lot of potential. A lot of David Montgomery outcomes.
Yeah,
for him.
We really
absolutely. David Montgomery outcomes.
But instead,
David Montgomery's not awesome.
I mean, ask somebody that played him in 2023.
I have to push back. That's one of the complaints you always get in the comments. Not enough pushback. I'm going to push back. I'm not going to let him say awesome.
I think.
Okay. And by the way, Anthony West, okay, at no point did Anand ever say that Geno Smith is awesome either. It was more a comparison vis-a-vis Sam Darnold than it was, Geno Smith is good. Yes, we know he led the league in interceptions. And last year, when people were hyping Geno Smith, I wasn't one of them. Because I'm like, God, this is Geno Smith we're talking about. Please, no. He's the one kind of mediocre quarterback that I'm particularly excited about this year is Daniel Jones, but not because of Daniel Jones, but because of what that means when he's under center for a player like Josh Downs. My love of Josh Downs and my enthusiasm to unlock Adonai Mitchell is what makes me want to see as much Daniel Jones as possible. Not because I think Daniel Jones has been underrated his whole career, or they ruined him and he can be salvaged, or Kevin O'Connell salvaged him and now he's ready to go. He's been fixed in Minnesota. Now he's just he's a gun that's ready to fire. No, that is a cap gun. Always has been, always will be. But that's still a hell of a lot better than just YOLO balls down the field to Alec Pierce.
Yeah, they can run an actual offense, and that's a big part of it, right? It's not just we're going to throw 80-yard bombs or run Jonathan Taylor. Real quick, the Geno Smith love is much more about an actual quarterback than fantasy. As a fantasy QB, that he's just been off my radar for the most part for a while. But so much of the sport is, what are you isolated from your conditions? Daniel Jones needs perfect conditions to thrive, is the wrong word, to produce at the level that you would want him to produce at. Geno Smith does not, and he's one of very few quarterbacks in the league that can do that. Darnold, again, another guy that kind of needs ideal situation around him in order to perform and produce the way that you'd want him to. But with Daniel Jones specifically, the Indy QB has value. They have a litany of tight ends they're like 7 on the roster for no reason. And then, you've got Alec Pierce, you've got Josh Downs, you've got Adonai Mitchell. And, I think when you look at what Indy's QB is and what they can be, especially in the run game, with both Jones and AR, I think you've got to be excited about, Daniel Jones had a lot of really solid back-end QB1 games in New York, not because he's a good quarterback, but because he runs. We don't care.
Right. And as long as you're with Geno Smith, when he was running for 366 yards, he was the QB8 in fantasy way back in 2022. And guess what he did? Last year, he had the exact same season, same yardage, same completion percentage, same yards per attempt, just a few less rushing yards and a few more interceptions, and he didn't get the touchdown luck that he had. So it was just the TD to interception ratio flipped on him from 2022 to 2024. Otherwise, he was the exact same guy who finished as the QB8. And at no point are you saying, this guy's awesome. Top 12 quarterback in fantasy football is Trevor Lawrence. That's just not awesome. That's not what we're talking about.
And you don't want QB, especially in single QB leagues or in any format, right? Or in any kind of spot where you're starting someone that's just kind of there where, yeah, you'll get high-end QB2 numbers, but they're just a guy. Those are the guys that you find every year that are highly replaceable, especially in single QB leagues. Like if you're still playing the old format, again, you're in redraft, right? If you're starting high-end QB2s every week, you get those on the waiver wire. Like that's not somebody you're excited to draft. They're only valuable in Superflex, and they're only valuable because it's Superflex. You're not excited to start Trevor Lawrence or Sam Darnold or Geno Smith in fantasy. Like, what are we doing here?
No, Geno Smith in Superflex is very valuable, has been very, very valuable.
Yeah.
It's just that eventually the slipper comes off with these guys who are, at their core, Derek Carr. You saw it on Player Profiler. Go to playerprofiler.com, look up Geno Smith, see who his best comp is. It's Derek Carr. And a guy like Derek Carr, when I think about Derek Carr, these are guys that when they were young and they were guaranteed multiple years as a starting quarterback, that's who you wanted as your QB3, like a J.J. McCarthy in Superflex leagues. But not now. Like, there's such a big difference. Like, the ADP differential doesn't tell the story in Superflex between the value of a J.J. McCarthy, which is incredible right now based on his career arc and how many years he's going to. He's 3 years. He's going to be the starting quarterback unless he totally face plants. Where Geno Smith, he's got a year left, and then we'll see what happens. Like, we're going to see what happens with Sam Darnold. It's all to see what happens, just like with Jimmy Garoppolo a couple of years ago. With the Raiders. It's just, we'll see what happens, guy. We'll see what happens. Now, a player who is currently on the block, maybe, is Joe Milton. Because the Patriots went out, they got Josh Dobbs. And again, this makes sense to me. Like, at first, it's like, what are you doing? You are squandering an incredible upside backup in Joe Milton. Why would you go sign Josh Dobbs? Makes no sense. You again, you have the bird in the hand in Joe Milton. What are you doing, Patriots? And then it's like, no. This team is all in on Drake May. That's all that mattered. This is a Drake May driven move. They're getting a veteran quarterback who has, leadership traits and is someone that Drake May can use as a resource. Where if he's a similar age of another young guy, then there's going to be this competition like with Brady and Jimmy Garoppolo, and it's not productive. We're either all in on Brady or we're not. And Garoppolo's got to go. Right. And so, hey, we're all in on Drake May, and Joe Milton is much better off going somewhere like New Orleans. I would love to see Milton in New Orleans, and then he can learn from Derek Carr. And then Derek Carr will inevitably flame out. The team is in flux, and it would be the perfect situation for him to just walk in week 13 and start a game. Everyone would love it.
Yeah. I mean, if you're Joe Milton, there's one path right now to really starting games, and that's probably the Giants, whereas maybe the Titans, but I think they're taking Cam, so that's the only opportunity that you're going to start early. But if you're Joe Milton, do you want to start early?
No, you don't care about starting early. No, you don't need to.
No. And so the idea is you go somewhere where the quarterback that's quote unquote established could be done by the end of the year. And, I think New Orleans is a great example, right? That their books are all super messy right now. They owe Derek Carr $1 bajillion. But if you come in and you play well, Spencer Rattler got into a couple games last year.
He's better than Spencer Rattler. How much of a mess is New Orleans books? Like, how long before New Orleans can operate with just a relatively normal approach to free agency and the cap? How long is it going to take?
Well, if they keep kicking the Derek Carr can down the road, it's as long as they keep doing that. But if not, it's at the end of next year. I think they'll be able to operate fairly normally if they get Carr off the books and have some kind of succession plan for him in place, whether that's I don't think it'll be Spencer Rattler, but if they see something in him, or if it's a Joe Milton in a trade. But this year is going to be ugly. Next year, I think, is also going to be kind of ugly as they kind of clear out everything from the Breeze and then now Carr era, in terms of, established veterans that they kept signing over and over again and pushing money into the future. But I mean, it's just, that's not a great football team. And quarterback's a big part of why.
Well, if you go to Theo's big board, New Orleans is picking at 9. I mean, I'm fascinated by New Orleans because I like a good rebuild, especially when they really have to tear it down to the studs. And if you look at who they could draft there at 9, Tyler Warren could be there. Tet McMillan could be there, but I prefer like an edge rusher like this Michael Williams.
Michael Williams, a freak.
Michael Williams, that's interesting, man. Like that's, or they could go offensive line. That's where they need to start rebuilding the foundation. And there's just a lot of options here. They got Kelvin Banks at offensive line, and then you never know who's going to slip, right? So it's possible. You get Will Johnson, cornerback, is also a cornerstone piece that they could start building with. And you need to reach a salary minimum. If you're tanking, you have to spend at least a certain amount of money to get to the salary floor.
Yeah.
And the beauty of the Derek Carr contract is it helps you get to the salary floor. So, right? And then you could, it makes it, so that contract makes it easier to tank. And then Derek Carr himself being below average among starting NFL quarterbacks also helps you tank. So in that way, being in this much quarterback purgatory and contract hell helps them.
Yeah,
helps them lock in a top 5 pick in 2026. And if they start, rebuilding the foundation and draft well this year, then draft well next year, then okay, you're right. 2027, this team could start to make some noise.
Yeah, and if you look at 2027, this is getting way out there. But if you look out at 2027, you're going to have multiple freak shows at wide receiver and Ryan Williams, Jeremiah Smith, Nick Marsh, the kid from MSU. You'll have DJ Lagway coming out of Florida to play QB. You've got Colin Simmons from Texas, freak athlete, Dylan Stewart, another one. That 2027, top 10, assuming that they all stay healthy, is going to be one of the best top 10s that we've seen in some time. And so if you're kind of looking for building your team, if you're in a multi-year rebuild, I think New Orleans is there pretty firmly. But if you're in a multi-year rebuild and you're looking out at like, hey, what's the season that we could go get the piece that supercharges us and kind of kickstarts our rebuild, kind of takes it from we're rebuilding to now we can at least kind of compete for the division. I think that 2027 class is kind of the first time that you'll look at New Orleans and say, whoa, like they really found a way to get Jeremiah Smith, or they found a way to get DJ Lagway. And suddenly the total outlook on the team changes overnight when you get a player like that. So I think that's kind of the way that I would lean with New Orleans. We've talked about it for a long time in terms of, hey, we would love to see Atlanta tear it down before they needed to at the end of Matt Ryan. I think we're kind of seeing, the same thing here where it's, you're holding on to hope of, being average because you're in a bad division for a little bit too long. Oh, we made the playoffs. Yeah, but you can't do anything when you get there. That doesn't really matter to me. I mean, you get into the playoffs at 9-8 in a first round exit. What was that really worth?
Well, what we're talking about is if they want to be competitive in 2027, it would be nice to have a top draft pick that year, right? That's the final step, right? The final step for the Lions was to have that top 3 pick and to use it on Aiden Hutchinson, and then it was go time, right? Well, if they just restructured Carr, and that's the thing, if you're not going to be competitive this year or next year, you might as well restructure it and continue to push that salary to another year out. The final season of his contract, Derek Carr's, is next season. And because they converted his base salary into a signing bonus, they will owe him $70 million next year.
Yeah.
And so they won't, that's $70 million they can't pay to quality football players, locking in their top 10 draft pick in 2027, which is exactly what you want. So as of 2027, they will have been stockpiled with young players, and Derek Carr will be gone.
Yeah, that's how you do it, right? It's not trading a bunch of draft capital for a player that you already have. We have George Pickens. Well, let's go get two of them.
Right. If you know you're multiple years away, you might as well restructure and keep this guy helping you tank under the radar as long as possible.
Well, yeah. I mean, you can't be openly tanking, but as close as you can possibly get is saying, hey,
Derek Carr at quarterback with owning him $70 million next year is about as close as it's going to get. I mean, you can't. It's just to someone who's like, we must win every year. In New Orleans, it looks like gross mismanagement, but to you and I, it's like, oh, this is pretty clever. This is a pretty clever wink and a nod here.
I mean, I think a lot of people in New Orleans would like to see you and I take snaps at QB before Derek Carr at this point. But yeah, I mean, it's a pretty clever way to take in public.
Oof. Who else you want to talk about? I got a list here.
Yeah,
I got a list of players.
For me, right? DK Metcalf for me was another one of those super duper interesting, what are you doing kind of moves where if you're Pittsburgh, you already have George Pickens, more of a 1B than a true one, where there are a lot of questions about him in the locker room. Is he committed enough? So on and so forth. And, I, for the life of me, do not understand unless they're bringing Bruce Arians out of retirement and trying to throw the ball 35 yards down the field on every play. For the life of me, I don't get it. I just think that of all of the destinations that you could have possibly sent DK Metcalf to, it's hysterical that it's the team that already has that exact profile on the team. And I mean, again, I hope that it's Aaron Rodgers that ends up there just personally, because that's going to be absolute theater all year long. And, the Steelers don't make a lot of headlines throughout the season unless it's a wide receiver saying something ridiculous. They're pretty typical. Score 20 points a game, hold the other team to 17. We'll just plow our way to 9-8, 10-7 every year, try to make the playoffs, extend Tomlin's streak, and keep it moving. But I just thought that was so funny to me that, every time a free agent comes out and makes their quote unquote demands or list of requests, it's always like, oh yeah, I want to go to a warm weather city and I want an established quarterback. And then you end up in a city that's about as cold as any we have in the league and with no quarterback. I don't even think there's a quarterback on the roster until they signed Mason Rudolph just now. So congrats to Mason and congrats to DK on his new QB. But selfishly, I hope that it's Rodgers just because I think that would be tremendous drama.
I wouldn't call George Pickens a beta receiver quite yet. He is a old school X receiver. Like, I wouldn't call him a beta any more than I would call Mike Evans a beta. In that, just a prototypical outside clasher. It's just that Mike Evans has put up the top 10 fantasy seasons and has commanded a bigger target share than George Pickens. I'm going to give George Pickens one more year to prove that, and especially sharing a field with DK Metcalf would be the ultimate proof. Right? If you get a quarterback that can throw the back shoulder like an Aaron Rodgers, that's it. That's the fuck. Because he did finish 14th in the NFL last year in target share and was top 10 in air yard share. So these are the types of metrics that you get from a Mike Evans. It's just that the offensive system was not great. Where is it Justin Fields and then it's Russell Wilson? We talked about this, the lack of continuity where you bring in two brand new quarterbacks. Like every year that you hit, before that it was Kenny Pickett. And Kenny Pickett can't throw the ball to the outside. Right? So now it's just been flawed quarterbacks, systems in flux. Yes, there's still a lack of continuity by bringing in Aaron Rodgers. That doesn't help your continuity, but at least it's a skill match with George Pickens. And now with DK Metcalf, it is real target competition. And if he can meet those tests and be productive this year, then okay, he's on track to be a quality Nico Collins, Mike Evans level X receiver. That is still in his range of outcomes. I am convinced because of his raw skill set that is still in his range of outcomes, but it's not likely. Like it's a highly uncertain season where so much is at stake. A lot of money is at stake for him.
Yeah.
His reputation, like his standing in the league. I mean, this is a huge season for him. And he already puts a lot of pressure on himself, clearly. And so I empathize with the guy. Like now they're bringing in a receiver who on the surface appears to have a redundant skill set. I think this is a opportunity for value. We're going to see where the ADP shakes out, especially on FastDraft over the next couple weeks with George Pickens. I think right now his ADP is too early, but in a couple weeks, who knows? DK Metcalf is a stay away for me. I don't trust it. I trust the Steelers, though. This is where I'm really in a pretzel because I typically trust the Steelers with wide receivers that are not Chase Claypool. And
man.
So it's tough. It's a tough situation. I don't understand the contract. It seems like a gross overpay based on his production and the fact that he's on the wrong side of his, efficiency curve. He was maxing out his efficiency 4 years ago, and he's just been in air yards decline ever since.
Matt,
he could actually play Z well. I think that it could be that he's too limited at X. But if you put him at Z, where it's just bubble screens and goes and post corners, it's like, hey, you gotta run 3 routes, and only one of them requires any technical skill. Just use your athleticism, right? Maybe they could do that because basically play the Tyler Lockett role in the West Coast offense for the Steelers. I think he'd be successful.
You're talking about a guy that openly told people that he was door dashing candy 4 times a day and eats 1 meal a day that's not coffee. Like, how long? like Pittsburgh strength and conditioning staff is going to see this man's diet and ask what the hell we're doing here. I don't question DK Metcalf's talent ever. I just wonder if the receiver that we idealize in our head, what we think he can be, right? Because when you see that physical profile and the speed that he has and the raw contested catch ability that he's shown before, and your mind jumps to the freak shows that we've seen with that physical profile before, and he's not a Josh Gordon. He's not a Calvin Johnson. Even though his body, and at times he can kind of trick your mind into thinking that he could be a diet version of those guys. That's not who he is. What he
diet
is,
version?
Yeah, the most diet version, the RC Cola version.
His diet is the worst in the league.
Talk
about a bad diet. It's so funny because I think that in the chat they're tired of me bringing up the candy anecdote. Like, enough with the candy anecdote. And I intentionally, everyone in this audience, I respect you. I respect the feedback. And I was just on Reddit, and I was supposed to be watching my daughter play soccer yesterday night. And she was like, "Did you see this great pass that I made?" And I said, "No, I missed it." And she's like, "Really? Usually you're watching the scrimmage by that." And I was like, "Well, I found a Reddit thread about me." And she's like, "You were reading the comments?" And I was like, I was reading the comments, the thing I told you, only suckers do this. It's not productive. It's a hate magnet. It's not a balanced view of the global opinion. Anyway, I was like, I'm sorry. I just was, but there was a couple things where I was like, it's a good point. Okay, we're trying to do better. And he repeats himself, and I was like, okay, I feel like I've repeated myself a few times, and I'm gonna get something productive out of this hellscape that I found myself in, and I'm not gonna bring up the DK Metcalf candy, but you did.
Yeah, I mean, it's not my first. It's not the first thing that comes to mind about him. But when you're talking about a guy that's at the age that he is, new home, even colder weather than he's used to, even more of an old school, we're going to ask you to block 45 runs a game. Like, I mean, how long is your body going to hold up? We've seen the guys that take care of their bodies and the guys that don't. And, everybody, Chad Johnson's famously a great one, right? Freak athlete. Like the top 1% of the 1%, even amongst NFL guys.
Was
but
he?
There's only so long.
Chad Johnson was a freak athlete?
Oh, yeah.
Ocho Cinco?
Hey, the guy that was eating McDoubles at halftime? Yeah, that guy is, dude. So when you hear people talk about how difficult he was to cover and his diet was terrible, his exercise regimen is incredible, but that's because you're a 1% athlete. Nobody else is that. He's, Chad Johnson's just a one of one. DK Metcalf's one of one. But how long does your body last? Those guys tend to not age as well as the guys like for example. Oh boy, workout metric. What does that speed score say?
Got to do it to you, Anand. I got to do it to you. I got to hold you accountable.
To me,
we have to be held accountable to player profiler.
We will be accountable. Chad Johnson, as a wide receiver, made freak athletes look very bad.
He was a very skilled wide receiver.
Yeah, made freak athletes look very bad. And the guy, you could tell the guys that take care of their body versus don't, because he was all pro to basically out of the league in 2 years? That's what happens to these guys. And so the question with the Steelers is, what did you buy and how long are you actually going to be able to hold it? Right. You're hoping to not pay out the end of that contract. I don't know. I think it was a strange move to me. It's something like a win now franchise would do. And
why did they sign Christian Kirk? Would have been a great move. They need a slot receiver. Win now franchise right now. Let Calvin Austin keep stretching the field. Christian Kirk in the slot. You got George Pickens at X. That was the move. Save money. And then you don't have.
I don't understand this at all.
Like clash of egos in the locker room. You have none of that. I want to see it. I mean, in terms of just primetime television, I want to see it, man. I want to see Rodgers, Metcalf, and Pickens on broken plays, on drops, right? On airmailed passes that are way into the out of bounds.
Today and days
see the look, see the arguments in the huddle. This is what we want. This we have to on the sidelines. I want to see these guys coming up to Rodgers on the sidelines. I want to see it, man. Who doesn't want it? This is must-see TV.
It almost has to be Rodgers because no other QB would be as funny. It's like after all this time we've spent talking about how average to above average the Steelers are/will be, but without any real shot to really win a title. It's just funny to watch kind of the carousel of things that they do where, DK Metcalf is a really fun player, but he's not what you needed. You needed Christian Kirk. I love that. Like that's the perfect plug-in right there. And you hope that George Pickens is your guy, but NFL teams do this all the time. They operate under the assumption that they might be wrong, right? DK Metcalf being there almost to an extent it's not them waving the white flag on George Pickens, but it's them acknowledging that they may be wrong about him. And if you do that, you might end up with two guys that are just X's and you have to get rid of one of them. And it's obviously going to be the guy that costs you at this point. You've invested draft capital in and you've brought into your system. Now you're bringing in a guy who you've never seen play in your uniform and you're paying him $100+ million. I don't understand it. If you're Philly and you thought AJ Brown was the piece to get you over a title hump, that I get. But Pittsburgh's not there, man. They don't even have a quarterback right now. It's not like this is the star on top of the Christmas tree. You're just throwing shit in a box at this point.
Yeah. Signing DK Metcalf without a quarterback was weird. Pittsburgh drafts. Oh. They also gave up their second rounder. Ooh.
Yeah.
Ooh. See, I was like, man, they could draft like Jalen Royals in the second round.
No, they can't.
That would have been another great solution for their Z receiver.
And this is the problem. Every time we come on here and talk about why we don't love trading for players, it's this. It's because you trade draft capital that you can use to acquire cheap players for the right to overpay someone.
Oh, I hate trading for the right to overpay someone. There it is. Look at this. God, this is painful. Everyone in Pittsburgh, remember this is what's happening. Just sear this into your mind. If maybe you think DK Metcalf's an exciting guy, and he is. He's exciting. He's an exciting, tantalizing talent that is just never going to be what he was sold to be. Right?
No.
This is Demaryius Thomas. We've seen guys that are like that kind of size, speed specimen have big seasons, but otherwise just never quite work out. I mean, at this point, if DK Metcalf has the Demaryius Thomas season, that's a big success for him. And these are guys that by the time they turned 30, they were out of the league. I mean, Randy Moss was famously drinking soda and all that, and then by age 31, he was on the Titans. Yeah. I think that's a coveted jersey. Apparently, the Randy Moss Titans jersey is one of these coveted jerseys.
Hey, I mean, look, guys get traded for all kinds of reasons, and the contract that they sign afterwards usually tells you how a team feels about them. The only other one that I was going to bring up was Laremy Tunsil, which that organization just gave up on him totally. That was it. They were out. Apparently, they had to have people babysitting him just to get him to come to practice. That's not good when that's your job and you're making tens of millions of dollars.
It's so interesting with these offensive linemen, though, where like a Mekhi Becton will resurface in the playoffs, and you're like, wait, is that Mekhi Becton from the Jets? Yeah. I thought he was done. I thought he was toast. I thought he was 400 pounds. I thought it was over. And like, no, he switched teams. And then the Patriots, once upon a time, I think it was one of the more famous reclamation project offensive linemen, where they got an offensive lineman from the Raiders, and he was like 6'8", 350, and they got him into shape, and they took him to a Super Bowl. Who was that?
Remember that guy?
What was his name?
Trent Brown.
Trent Brown. Like, that was epic. Trent Brown, you knew if things lined up just right, if he was healthy and he was in good condition and he was motivated, that he'd be a top 5 left tackle in the league. But teams are giving up on him because they're like, we can't get him to show up. It's just interesting with these offensive linemen, like what motivates them to get out of bed in the morning. I mean, I know it's hard. They're big dudes. I can't even imagine what it's like to like move around in life at that size. And then to just be constantly in pain or constantly having to, just face NFL caliber defensive linemen and edge rushers. Eventually, I can see these guys just like, can I have a year off? Can I just? I can't do this, please.
Yeah,
you've had offensive linemen have breakdowns like in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, you look to the two reclamation projects that you're talking about in Trent Brown and in Mekhi Becton. I think the common thread there is you need to find a good O-line coach, because Dante Scarnecchia at the time was the best that there was, and Jeff Stoutland in Philly right now is the best that there is. there's a reason that every guy that comes to Philly as a reclamation project or as a moldable piece of clay on that Philly O-line turns out. It's because of Jeff Stoutland. There's a reason that the Patriots were able to draft a bunch of 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round guys and reclamation projects for other teams and turn them into all pros. It's a part of building your entire system out. And if you have that guy, Bill Callahan for a long time was that guy. But once you have one of these, O-line coaches that you trust, you can afford to do riskier things in the draft with O-linemen and take guys in the 6th round and trust that they might turn into something. You cannot do that if your offensive line already sucks. I'm looking at you, Bears, and I'm very glad that they addressed that in the way that they did, where they went out and got known quantities. And I hope that Caleb doesn't get hit 940 times this year. But again, like we said before,
but if you're the Bears, what a nice situation to be in, where we have one meaningful need area left, and it's a huge gaping one, and we're just going to throw everything we have at it at the offensive line. And maybe we know we need a running back. Maybe we'll draft a running back. Maybe we won't. It's fine. Offensive line, offensive line, offensive line. That is the hallmark of a quality rebuild, where you can get it to the place where we have one more unit that we need to make over, and then we're ready to ship it. We're ready to go for a championship.
Yeah. I think a lot of the times the teams that are spending in free agency, the big spenders, so to speak, are teams mostly that have drafted poorly and or had mass exodus of guys that they can't pay. And so they're looking for either cheap replacements, which again, it's better to be free than to be great when it comes to contract negotiations, because they're making a whole lot more money when they hit the free market. But for the guys that the Bears grabbed, right, you're talking about 2 guards and a center. I think the most interesting part about it were how intentional they were about guys that have had snaps. They're not reclamation projects. They're not upside guys. They're all, Joe Thuney, all pro, Drew Dahlman, the center, again, known quantity. They're not guessing on the offensive line anymore, which is a really good sign for them going forward. But a lot of these free agency deals that we saw, quarterback or otherwise, they're all overpays because the guys are available. And now you've created a bidding war between you and 31 other teams. And, that guy's services, I'm sure there's a number that Minnesota would have taken Darnold back at to be a mentor for McCarthy again this year. But, you get priced out of a lot of these things, and a lot of people get upset with their team about lack of free agent acquisitions. Sometimes you just don't need to pay into an inflated market, and, it is what it is. Oh, my God.
Yeah, I think this is a good trade. I think time and time again, a narrative gets built around one of these offensive linemen that they're disgruntled, whatever it is. And the thought is, well, it's over. But as long as, they're still 29, 30, they got a couple of years left, they have the foundation physically, they've got the athleticism, that's still all there, that it's just an effort or an attitude adjustment that is required, then going to a team that is a winning team with a great leader, whether it be, Jalen Hurts or now Jaden Daniels, because that's Tunsil's going to the Commanders. I like it. I like that move. That's the type of move, if I were an NFL GM, I would be making. It's interesting to see Washington making these kinds of moves. It's disorienting to me. It's one of those things where you and I, we sit down and we look at all these transactions, and there's just some teams that we never talk about making smart moves. Yeah. And then so when you see these teams suddenly, it's like, oh, well, it's like at some point the Saints are going to start doing this. Like we know this is going to happen. At some point the Saints are going to start to make some savvy moves. We're going to be like, oh, this is disorienting. The Saints are doing savvy things. This is wild. Or it's like disorienting to see the Pittsburgh Steelers in the opposite direction. It's like, wait, the Steelers blew it on a wide receiver? That never happens unless his name is Chase Claypool. So that's their one weakness. Maybe that's their Achilles heel. Is it if it's Chase Claypool, DK Metcalf level athleticism, they're susceptible to getting fooled. Otherwise, everyone is Antonio Brown or Emmanuel Sanders or Deontay
Ridiculous.
Johnson. These are big hits by Pittsburgh. So it's going to be interesting to see how Washington continues to build out this franchise because they're ready to win now. And that's the what a great win now move to go get Laremy Tunsil.
The thing about Adam Peters, Washington's GM, is, last year we talked so much about how much we loved their draft, but even the best drafts that we look at have 4 hits on them or 5 hits on them. If you have a draft class where you hit on 5 or 6 guys, where they're all contributors, starters for you almost immediately, that's how you flip from a 7-win team to a 13-win team, especially when one of those is a quarterback and looks like one of the best rookie quarterbacks we've ever seen. But I don't think he got nearly enough credit, him and Dan Quinn, for what they built around Jaden Daniels, because it wasn't just, this Cam Newton superhuman run where it's one guy carrying an entire team on his back. That whole team was really well built. It was thoughtfully constructed. They brought the right pieces back. I mean, McLaurin had an incredible season. We'd been waiting and waiting and waiting. Like, please get this kid a quarterback. He finally gets one. Jaden's incredible. You have, so many different weapons that they have there for him. And then the O-line looks good and got there and they say, all right, well, can we throw one last dart at tackle? Do we have a little bit of room left for the old all-pro Laremy Tunsil? Can we get him to buy in for, a rookie quarterback that might just have that Jalen Hurts-esque run to a Super Bowl or that Russell Wilson-esque run to a Super Bowl or, Ben Roethlisberger? The list goes on and on about these young quarterbacks that we know are going to be really, really good that take that second or third year run to the Super Bowl. Can we interest you in that, Laremy, in the NFC where you don't have to deal with Myles Garrett and TJ Watt and all those guys every single week? I think that, if you're Washington, you got to be thrilled about the future of your franchise. And, Adam Peters and Dan Quinn have done a hell of a job.
If you're a team that had a Gruden, right, with a, a wayward front office, the times are changing, man. So if you think about 2 teams where we used to just assume that they were going to flunk the draft, it was Washington, right? And in the NFC, and in the AFC, the team where now we're looking up and we're like, oh, this is a pretty good move. This is interesting. Look at this team. I'm not used to this. The Las Vegas Raiders. Hey, I want to take a moment to thank you for tuning in. It's important to me that all of our media be free. This is only possible because of you, allowing a true independent sports media enterprise to thrive unlike any other in the business. So please subscribe to the All In Package to continue to make all of this possible, to ensure that all of our stats, information, data, content is available to you, especially you, the people that get the site and get the show.